The world stopped turning on a Sunday. It was August 17, 1969, a day thick with the syrupy heat of a Virginia summer. I remember the date so clearly because it would have been my mother's birthday. May she rest in peace. She always said that the most significant moments in a person's life, good or bad, often arrive on the most ordinary of days, slipping in unnoticed until they detonate. My name is Gertrude Miller, and at 78, looking back across the chasm of 50 years, I can still feel the tremor of that detonation. That morning, like every morning for the past decade, I was the picture of the perfect wife. I had risen before the sun, my movements a silent, practiced ballet in the quiet of our home. The scent of freshly baked bread and brewing coffee filled the air, a fragrant shield against the chaos of the world outside our small town. America was a nation tearing itself apart over the Vietnam War and civil rights, but here on our tree-lined street, life moved at the gentle, predictable pace of a pendulum clock. I was 29 years old, married to Anthony, the town's most respected bank accountant. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, always dressed in impeccable suits that seemed to repel dust and doubt in equal measure. To our neighbors, we were an advertisement for the American dream. We had a simple but comfortable home with a garden where my dahlias bloomed in disciplined bursts of color. We had two beautiful children, Michael, my serious, bookish 8-year-old, and Teresa, my free-spirited 6-year-old artist, whose crayon drawings papered our refrigerator door. My life was a tapestry woven from routine. Breakfast on the table at 7 sharp. Anthony, rustling his newspaper, would drink his coffee black while I packed the children's lunches. After they left, a whirlwind of chores, cleaning, laundry, mending. In the afternoons, I retreated to my sewing corner, my own small enterprise catering to a select clientele of the town's most discerning ladies. A woman needs a craft in her hands to never be in need, my mother had taught me. I never imagined that her practical advice would one day become my lifeline. From the outside, our life was flawless. Anthony was affectionate in public, a master of the charming gesture. He brought gifts on birthdays and anniversaries, and our table was never bare. But behind the closed doors of our home, the air was thin. Our life was punctuated by long, heavy silences, by his unexplained absences, and by the persistent, gnawing feeling that I was living on the surface of a deep, dark lake, oblivious to what lurked beneath. He traveled often for bank business, usually on the first Thursday of each month. His explanations were always vague, delivered with an air of professional importance that discouraged further questions. I learned early on that my role was not to question. Once, emboldened by a rare glass of wine at dinner, I had pressed for details about a trip to New York. He had set down his fork, his eyes turning to cold, gray stones. "Gertrude," he'd said, his voice quiet but sharp as broken glass, "you have a roof over your head and food on the table. You don't need to know more than that." The message was clear. My world was confined to the four walls of this house, and his was none of my concern. I learned to swallow my curiosity, to accept the edited version of the man I had married. I believed him, or perhaps it was simply easier to pretend to. On that particular Sunday, the children were at my mother-in-law's house for lunch. Anthony had left early, claiming he had to sort out some urgent paperwork at the bank ahead of a big transfer, scheduled for the following week. I was alone, a prisoner to a migraine that had descended during the night like a malevolent fog. The pain was a physical presence, a hot, sharp spike behind my right eye, making bright spots dance in my vision. Lying down was impossible, the throbbing only intensified. I knew Anthony kept strong painkillers in his office, potent pills he brought back from his trips to New York that were far more effective than any of the herbal remedies my mother had sworn by. Anthony's office was forbidden territory. It was his sanctuary, a space he claimed was necessary for a man of his standing to think without interruptions. The door was always closed. He never locked it when he was away, a testament to his supreme confidence that his authority would never be challenged. He never imagined I would dare to cross that threshold without permission. But that day, the pain was a more formidable authority than my husband. It was a physical, screaming thing that drowned out the quiet, dutiful voice of the wife I was supposed to be. Respect for the unspoken rules of our marriage crumbled under the relentless assault of the migraine. With a trembling hand, I pushed open the door. The room was dark and somber, smelling of stale tobacco, old paper, and the expensive imported cologne he wore only on his business trips. A heavy wooden desk dominated the space, flanked by a leather armchair and shelves lined with impressive-looking books that I doubted he had ever read. They were props, part of the elaborate stage set of his life. I knew the medicine was in the top drawer of his desk. My hands fumbled as I searched among a clutter of pens, paper clips, and official-looking documents. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the pain in my head cresting. I reached out, grabbing onto a bookshelf to steady myself. My clumsy movement dislodged a stack of books. A heavy leather-bound Bible, a family heirloom he displayed with pride but never opened, tumbled to the floor with a dull, sickening thud. It fell open, its brittle, yellowed pages splayed across the wooden floorboards. And from between the pages of Proverbs, a small, folded piece of paper slipped out. My first instinct was pure panic. I had to put everything back exactly as it was. If Anthony discovered I had been in here, touching his things, the thought was terrifying. But as I bent down to retrieve the Bible, my eyes were drawn to that small, innocuous piece of paper. Something held me there, a force stronger than fear. My curiosity, so long suppressed, rose up like a dormant beast. With hands that shook so badly I could barely unfold it, I picked up the note. The handwriting was neat, familiar. It belonged to Edward, the bank manager and Anthony's closest friend. I recognized it instantly from the Christmas cards he sent every year. The message was brief. Just 7 words. 7 words that would cleave my life in two. If she discovers the truth, kill her. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The roaring migraine vanished, replaced by a cold, silent clarity that was far more terrifying. My legs gave way, and I sank into his leather armchair, the note clutched in my fist. The paper felt heavy, impossibly so, as if it contained the weight of all the unspoken truths of my marriage. Kill her. Who was she? Was it me? And what truth was so monumental, so catastrophic, that it would warrant my death? My mind, suddenly sharp and lucid, raced through 1,000 possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Was he in debt? Was he involved in something illegal? The big transfer he had mentioned suddenly sounded ominous. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. I had to think. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. If this note was real, if it meant what I feared, my life was in danger. Confronting Anthony was not an option. He was a man who prized control above all else. A direct accusation would be met with cold denial, and then what? The note provided the chilling answer. With a surge of adrenaline, I smoothed out the crumpled paper. I had to put it back. I carefully refolded it and slipped it back into the Bible, between the same pages of Proverbs. I placed the book back on the shelf, aligning it perfectly with the dust marks. I found the painkillers, swallowed one dry, and walked out of the office, closing the door softly behind me. I lay down on the living room sofa, pulling an Afghan over my legs, and closed my eyes, feigning sleep. But behind my closed eyelids, my mind was a frantic whirlwind. The perfect wife was gone. In her place was a woman who had just looked over the edge of a precipice and seen the abyss waiting below. When Anthony returned late that afternoon with the children, their laughter and chatter filling the house, I was ready. I had composed myself, arranging my features into a mask of weary domesticity. I was Gertrude, the wife with a headache, resting on the couch. "Feeling any better, dear?" he asked, his voice laced with the practiced concern he reserved for public consumption. "A little," I murmured. The rest helped. That night, I served dinner as I always did. I listened to Michael's detailed account of his day and praised Teresa's latest drawing. I laughed at one of Anthony's unfunny jokes, a dry, humorless sound that felt alien in my own throat. On the outside, nothing had changed. I was the same Gertrude, playing my part in the familiar play of our family life. But on the inside, the stage had collapsed. The script had been set on fire. Something fundamental had broken, and it could never be repaired. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. I maintained our routine with meticulous precision. Breakfast at 7, children off to school, house immaculate, dinner on the table at 6 sharp. But now I was an observer, a spy in my own home. Every detail, every word, every gesture was filtered through the terrifying lens of those 7 words. I noticed things I had previously dismissed. The way Anthony now locked the top drawer of his desk, even when he was just stepping out to the garden. The way he would quickly shuffle papers out of sight if I entered his office unexpectedly. The hushed, clipped tones of his phone conversations when he thought I was out of earshot. These were no longer the quirks of a private man. They were the actions of a man with a secret. A deadly secret. A week after I found the note, I made my first concrete discovery. I was ironing his shirts, preparing them for his next business trip. The first Thursday of the month was approaching. As my hand moved over the crisp cotton, I felt a lump in the inner pocket of his suit jacket. My fingers closed around a crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt from a high-end jewelry store in Richmond, the next city over. The date was from his last trip. The amount was staggering, nearly 3 times the monthly allowance he gave me to run the entire household. The item purchased made my heart stop. An engagement ring described in elegant script as a solitaire diamond. I felt a physical blow, as if I had been struck. Anthony had never bought me expensive jewelry. My wedding band was a simple, unadorned gold circle. Who was this ring for? My mind reeled. The note wasn't about a business deal gone wrong. It was about another woman. In the same pocket, tucked into a small compartment, was a business card from the jeweler. On the back, in Anthony's neat, precise handwriting, was an address in Richmond. I stared at it, the street name and number burning themselves into my memory. I carefully smoothed out the receipt, folded it, and placed it back in the pocket, along with the card, exactly as I had found them. My hands were steady, but inside a storm was raging. The betrayal was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, but underneath the pain, a cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. I needed to go to Richmond. Over the next 2 weeks, I manufactured a series of excuses. I needed a special kind of silk thread for Mrs. Weatherby's dress. I had to visit a distant cousin who was feeling unwell. I wanted to buy a special birthday present for Teresa that I couldn't find in our small town. Anthony, preoccupied with his own secrets, barely seemed to notice my unusual excursions. On my 3rd trip, I found the address. It was in an elegant, leafy neighborhood, a world away from our simple, modest street. The house was beautiful, a 2-story colonial with pristine white shutters and a porch swing. I parked my car down the street and watched, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. After an hour, I saw a woman watering the flowers in the garden of the house next door. She was elderly with a kind, open face. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked towards her, feigning the cheerful confusion of a lost traveler. "Excuse me," I began, putting on my most charming smile. "I seem to be a bit lost. I'm looking for the Hendersons' house. Do you happen to know them?" "The Hendersons moved out last year, dear," she said, her voice warm and friendly. "A lovely young teacher lives there now. A Miss Marianne Oliveira." Marianne. The name was like a stone dropping into the dark well of my fears. "Oh, what a shame," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "She must be new to the area." "Yes, just moved in a few months ago," the woman chattered on, happy for the company. "Such a sweet girl. So beautiful and educated. She's expecting a child, you know. Poor thing, her fiancé has to work out of town. He only comes to visit on Thursdays. They say he's a very important man, an accountant at a bank. They're planning to get married as soon as he can resolve some complications with his ex-wife." Each word was a hammer blow, cracking the foundations of my life. A fiancé who visited on Thursdays, the day of Anthony's business trips. Complications with his ex-wife. That was me. In his new life, I was already a ghost, a problem to be resolved. And a child. He was starting a new family. I thanked the woman, my smile feeling like a brittle mask, and walked back to my car in a daze. I drove home on autopilot, the 2-hour journey a blur of green trees and gray asphalt. My marriage wasn't just a lie. It was a carefully constructed fiction, and I was the unwitting, disposable character. The note in the Bible was not a hypothetical threat. It was a contingency plan. If she discovers the truth, and now I had. The drive back from Richmond was the longest 2 hours of my life. The cheerful chatter of the radio felt like a mockery, a soundtrack from a different, happier world. When I pulled into my driveway, the sight of my own home, the dahlias I had so carefully tended, the swing set where my children played, felt alien. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. The pain of betrayal was a raw, open wound. But something else was stirring within me. A cold, furious anger. I had given this man 10 years of my life. I had borne his children, kept his home, soothed his ego. And for what? To be discarded like an old piece of furniture? To be considered an obstacle that might need to be removed? No, I would not be a victim. I would not be erased. That night, as I lay in bed next to the snoring form of my husband, a plan began to form in the darkness. It was a terrifying, audacious plan for a woman like me. A woman who had been taught to be quiet, to be compliant, to never make waves. But the woman I had been was gone, drowned in the dark waters of Anthony's deceit. A new woman was emerging, one forged in fear and fury. My first step was to gather more information. I needed to understand the full scope of his plan. The big transfer at the bank seemed to be the key. My opportunity came through an unexpected source. Mrs. Arasima, the bank's new secretary. She was a recent widow, a little lonely, and grateful for any kindness shown to her. I made it a point to be kind. I struck up conversations with her at the market, admired her new hat at church, and offered to hem a dress for her free of charge. During one of our chats after Sunday service, she innocently provided the next piece of the puzzle. "Oh, Gertrude, we are all just run off our feet at the bank," she sighed, fanning herself with the church bulletin. "This big transfer at the end of the month has everyone in a tizzy. Your husband and Mr. Edward have been staying late almost every night, reviewing documents. I've never seen so many zeros in my life. The end of the month." Anthony had already mentioned that he would be taking a special trip on that date, a trip that might last longer than usual. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture of breathtaking criminality. Anthony and Edward weren't just planning to leave me, they were planning to rob the bank. They would divert the money from the transfer, and then he would disappear, starting a new life with his new family, funded by stolen money. My children and I would be left behind, penniless and disgraced. And if I found out beforehand, the note was his insurance policy. My next move was riskier. I remembered a small, unusual key I had found in his shaving kit several months ago. When I'd asked about it, he'd been uncharacteristically sharp, snapping that it was for an old file cabinet at the bank before snatching it away. I had a feeling it was more than that. I waited for a morning when he left for work and the children were at school. The house was silent, my own heartbeat a frantic drum in my ears. I began to search. It wasn't in his desk drawer, which was now perpetually locked. It wasn't in the pockets of his suits or in the box where he kept his important papers. Finally, I found it. It was hidden inside a hollowed-out book on his shelf. The irony was almost laughable. The title of the fake book was Business Ethics. My hands trembled as I took the key. I knew instinctively where to look. At the bottom of our wardrobe, behind a stack of old travel bags we never used, was a loose floorboard. I had discovered it years ago while cleaning. Beneath it was a small hidden compartment, and inside that compartment was a small locked metal box. The key slid into the lock and turned with a soft click. I lifted the lid. What I found inside confirmed my worst fears and then some. There were 2 ship tickets to Buenos Aires, Argentina, dated for the day after the big transfer. They were in the names of Anthony Miller and Marian Oliveira. Tucked beneath them were fake identity documents for both of them. Passports, birth certificates, all expertly forged. But it was the bundle of letters that made me feel truly sick. They were from Marianne, written in a looping feminine hand on scented paper. They were filled with declarations of love, with dreams of their future together, with references to our baby who will soon complete our family. The last letter was the most recent, dated just 2 weeks prior. "My dearest love," it began. "Only 2 more weeks until we are together forever. I have arranged everything here as we planned. The baby's crib is set up in the nursery, waiting for him. I cannot wait to start our real life, away from that suffocating little town, and that woman who never deserved a man like you. Be careful with the final details. As Edward always says, if she discovers the truth before it's time, you know what needs to be done. But I know everything will be perfect. Soon we will be the family we were always meant to be. With all my love, Marianne." Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. 10 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of shared moments. All of it dismissed as if it were nothing. I was that woman, a temporary inconvenience. And the casual, chilling reference to Edward's warning confirmed it. This wasn't just Anthony's plan. It was a cold-blooded conspiracy. I sat there on the floor of my bedroom, the evidence of my husband's betrayal and criminal intentions spread out before me. And in that moment, the grief and fear crystallized into something else. A diamond-hard resolve. I would not be a victim. I would not be eliminated. I would turn their own plan against them. Carefully, meticulously, I put everything back. The letters, the tickets, the fake documents all returned to the metal box. I locked it and placed it back in the hidden compartment under the floorboard. The key went back inside the fake book. I wiped my fingerprints from every surface. When Anthony came home that evening, there would be no sign that his secret world had been laid bare. I had 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the heist. 2 weeks to craft a plan of my own. As I stood up, my back straight, my tears dry, I knew what I had to do. I was no longer just fighting for my marriage or my pride. I was fighting for my children's future. And for my life. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my life. I was living a double existence. By day, I was Gertrude Miller, devoted wife and mother, going about my mundane routine. I baked cookies, helped with homework, and smiled sweetly at my husband. But by night, when the house was asleep, I became a strategist, a plotter, a woman meticulously planning a counterinsurgency against the man who shared her bed. My plan had 4 crucial steps. First, I needed money. My own money. Anthony controlled our finances with an iron fist. The household savings were in an account that required his signature. I couldn't touch it without raising suspicion. But I had my sewing money, the cash I had been carefully stashing away for years in a tin box, hidden beneath my fabric scraps. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. Getting it into a bank, however, was a problem. In 1969, it was unusual for a married woman to have her own account without her husband's knowledge. I needed an ally. I found one in Mrs. Eulalia, my wealthiest and most eccentric client, the widow of a cattle rancher who valued independence above all else. While fitting her for a dress for her niece's wedding, I carefully planted the seed. It's so difficult not having one's own bank account, I sighed, feigning frustration. Anthony says a wife doesn't need one, that he takes care of everything. Mrs. Eulalia snorted, her jowls quivering with indignation. Nonsense, Gertrude. That's what my late husband used to say. Every woman needs her own nest egg. It's a matter of dignity. I'll take you to my bank manager in Richmond tomorrow. A different bank, a different city. Your husband and that weasel Edward will never be the wiser. True to her word, she drove me to Richmond the next day. I opened my first bank account, depositing the 5 years of saved sewing money. It felt like a declaration of independence. It was a small sum, but it was mine. The second step was to gather hard evidence. The letters and tickets were damning, but I needed proof of the financial crime itself. If something went wrong, I couldn't risk being dismissed as a hysterical, vengeful wife. I needed cold, hard facts. I began making furtive trips into Anthony's office when he was out. My heart hammered against my ribs each time I crossed the threshold. I had to be quick, efficient, and leave no trace. I bought a small Kodak Instamatic camera in Richmond, a marvel of modern technology that was small enough to hide in my sewing basket. I started by photographing the contents of the locked desk drawer. I had watched Anthony closely and realized he kept a spare key on his main keyring. One afternoon while he was napping, I carefully slipped the keyring from his trousers, my hands slick with sweat. I unlocked the drawer, photographed every document inside. Ledgers, account statements, transfer orders, and then locked it again, returning the key without him stirring. The documents were a revelation. They showed a pattern of embezzlement stretching back at least 3 years. Anthony and Edward had been siphoning small amounts of money from the accounts of elderly or deceased clients, funneling it into a series of ghost accounts. The big transfer was to be their grand finale, the diversion of a $500,000 shipment of cash intended for the expansion of the town's textile factory. In today's money, that would be millions. But photographs weren't enough. I needed copies. This was my most audacious move. I went to Mr. Motzer, the owner of the town's only stationery store, whose wife was a regular client. I spun a tale about wanting to create a surprise anniversary album for Anthony, a scrapbook of our life together. Mr. Motzer, I said, my voice full of manufactured sentimentality, I have our marriage certificate, the children's birth certificates. I'd love to make copies to put in the album before he gets home. Could I possibly use your copy machine for just a few minutes? He was hesitant. Mrs. Miller, you know I'm not supposed to let anyone use the machine without authorization. I smiled my most charming, non-threatening smile. I understand completely. It's just it would mean so much. As a thank you, I could make that new Sunday dress for your wife she was admiring. The offer of a free dress did the trick. That afternoon, while my children were at school, I stood in the back room of the stationery store, the whirring of the copy machine sounding like a squadron of helicopters in my ears. I copied the most incriminating documents from Anthony's drawer. I left with a manila envelope full of proof, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and triumph. The third step was the most dangerous, finding someone I could trust to deliver the evidence to. The town was a web of Anthony and Edward's influence. The local sheriff played poker with them every Saturday. The judge was Michael's godfather. The priest heard Edward's weekly confessions. There was no one I could turn to locally. Then I remembered Inspector Mendez. He was a man from the state capital who conducted periodic, unannounced inspections of the bank. Anthony loathed him, calling him the self-righteous incorruptible. He was perfect. Through my conversations with Mrs. Arasama, I learned that Inspector Mendez was scheduled for a routine inspection the following week and would be staying at the town's only inn for 3 days. I prepared an anonymous package, copies of the documents, the photographs I had taken, and a typed letter explaining the entire scheme, from the long-term embezzlement to the planned heist of the $500,000 transfer. I didn't sign it. Delivering it was the problem. The inn was in the center of town, opposite the main square. I couldn't be seen going in there. The solution came unexpectedly from my daughter. Teresa had befriended Marietta, the daughter of the inn's owner, Mrs. Zulmara. I arranged for the girls to have a playdate at the inn. When I dropped Teresa off, I complimented Mrs. Zulmara on her handsome leather handbag. "What a beautiful purse," I gushed. "The strap is exactly the style I need for a dress I'm designing. Could I possibly borrow it for just an hour to take a measurement?" "I'll bring it right back." Puzzled but flattered, she agreed. I took the purse home, carefully unstitched a small section of the inner lining, slipped my sealed envelope inside, and stitched it back up with the skill of a surgeon. When I returned the purse an hour later, the evidence was safely hidden inside. Tucked into an outer pocket was a small separate note. "Mrs. Zulmara, please give this purse to Inspector Mendez when he arrives. It is a welcome gift from a concerned citizen. Do not mention my name." The fourth and final step was to prepare for the future. If my plan worked, Anthony would go to prison. I would be a divorced woman, a pariah in 1969, with 2 small children to support. I reconnected with a childhood friend, Louise, who had moved to the capital and opened a small sewing studio. I didn't tell her the whole truth, only that my marriage was failing and I would need to find work. "Gertie, come here whenever you need to," she said over the phone, her voice a lifeline. "I could use a partner with your talent. There's a small room behind the studio and the kids can use until you get on your feet." She didn't ask questions. True friends never do. The final week passed in a blur of surreal normalcy. I baked cakes, read bedtime stories, and kissed my husband goodnight, all while a storm of my own making was about to break. Anthony was visibly on edge, having frequent, hushed meetings with Edward. The night before the transfer, he watched the children during dinner with a strange, melancholic expression. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if he felt any remorse for what he was about to do, for the family he was about to shatter. But then I remembered the note, and the pity curdled in my stomach. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake, listening to the ticking of the clock, each second bringing us closer to the dawn, closer to the moment when our lives would be irrevocably changed. I was terrified, but I was also ready. The meek, obedient wife was a distant memory. I was a survivor, and I would do whatever it took to protect my children. The day of the big transfer dawned bright and clear. A perfect blue sky that felt like a cruel joke. The air was still, but for me it hummed with an electric, unbearable tension. I moved through the morning rituals on autopilot, my body performing the familiar tasks while my mind was 1,000 miles away, rehearsing every possible outcome. I dressed the children, their innocent chatter a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I made breakfast, pancakes their favorite, my hand steady despite the tremor in my soul. Anthony was distracted, his eyes constantly darting to the clock on the kitchen wall. He barely touched his food. "I'll be working late tonight," he announced, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup. "Don't wait up for me for dinner." "Is everything all right at the bank?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of wifely concern. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Fine. Just bureaucracy. The big transfer. You know how it is." He knew I knew nothing, and that was how he liked it. Before he left, he did something he hadn't done in years. He kissed me on the cheek. It was a dry, fleeting touch, cold and meaningless. Then he hugged the children, holding them for a moment too long. Michael, ever my sensitive boy, looked up at him with a puzzled expression. Anthony was not a demonstrative man. The gesture was out of character, and it sent a chill down my spine. Was this his final goodbye? As soon as the front door closed behind him, I sprang into action. I had prepared for every contingency. I had a small suitcase packed with essential clothes for myself, and the children hidden under my bed. I had gathered our important documents, birth certificates, vaccination records, a few cherished family photos, and placed them in a large envelope. I divided the cash from my secret bank account, hiding small amounts in different places. A portion in my purse, some tucked into the lining of the suitcase, another bundle inside a hollowed-out book, a cookbook, this time. The day crawled by at a glacial pace. I dropped the children at school, went to the market, and worked on a dress for the pharmacist's wife, my fingers moving through the familiar motions of sewing, a strange comfort in the mechanical task. Every passing car on the street made my heart leap into my throat. Late in the afternoon, Mrs. Erasima made a surprise visit, using the pretext of trying on her half-finished dress. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Gertrude," she whispered as I knelt to adjust the hem, her voice barely audible. "There are policemen at the bank. From the capital. They arrived with the armored truck for the transfer. Inspector Mendez is with them. Mr. Edward is locked in his office with 3 men in dark suits. Your husband tried to leave for lunch, but they asked him to stay." I nodded, my face a mask of concentration on the stitches. "Thank you, Erasima," I murmured. "The hem is perfect." She left, and the moment the door closed, I sank into my sewing chair, my body trembling uncontrollably. It was happening. My anonymous tip, my carefully copied documents, my hidden envelope, it had worked. The trap had been sprung. But what came next? My first priority was the children. I picked them up from school, their faces bright with stories of their day. I drove them not home, but to my sister-in-law Lucinda's house. Lucinda was Anthony's sister, a kind, practical woman who adored her niece and nephew. "Lucinda," I said, forcing a cheerful smile, "I have an urgent dress order I have to finish tonight. Would you mind terribly if the children had dinner and spent the night here? It would be such a help." She was of course delighted. If the worst happened, if Anthony somehow suspected me and came home in a rage, the children would be safe. I returned to an empty, silent house. The quiet was oppressive. The dinner I had prepared sat cold on the stove. I walked from room to room, a ghost in my own home waiting. The sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red, like a premonition. At 8 o'clock, the sound I had been dreading and anticipating all day finally came. The wail of sirens. Not one but several, growing louder as they raced through the town center, towards the bank. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, half an hour later, there was a frantic, loud knocking at my front door. It wasn't the police. It was Lucinda. Her face was pale, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Gertrude, have you heard?" she cried, pushing past me into the house. "Anthony and Edward, they've been arrested. They're saying they tried to steal the money for the textile factory transfer. It's a scandal. The whole town is down at the square." I leaned against the doorframe, allowing my body to sag, performing the role of the shocked, devastated wife. It wasn't entirely an act. The reality of it, the finality, was overwhelming. "It can't be," I whispered. "There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake," she said, her voice dropping. "Gertrude, they said Inspector Mendez received an anonymous tip. With evidence. Documents, photographs, everything. They've apparently been stealing money for years. She wrung her hands, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. And there's more. What? I asked, though I already knew. She couldn't meet my eyes. They found ship tickets. To Argentina. In Anthony's name. And the name of some woman called Marianne. They say she's pregnant. Living in Richmond. I let myself collapse into a chair, burying my face in my hands. The shock was real, but so was the pain of hearing the betrayal spoken aloud, of knowing it was now public knowledge, fodder for town gossip. One thing is to know a secret. Another is to have it thrown into the light for all to see. The children. I murmured, my voice muffled. Are they all right? They're fast asleep, Lucinda said, sitting beside me, taking my hand. Her touch was warm, comforting. They can stay with me as long as you need. Gertrude, what are you going to do? The question hung in the silent room. What was I going to do? For the past 2 weeks I had known the answer. I had planned for this moment with cold, calculated precision. The news of the arrest spread through our small town like a fever. The Bible heist, the newspapers from Richmond called it, after a reporter got wind of the note found in Anthony's office Bible. Our quiet, respectable town had never seen a scandal of this magnitude. Overnight, I went from being Gertrude Miller, the respected bank accountant's wife, to Gertrude Miller, the thief's wife. The betrayed woman. The fool. The morning after the arrests, I woke up at Lucinda's house. The children were still asleep, blissfully unaware that their world had fractured. I looked out the window and saw a small cluster of neighbors standing on the sidewalk, their heads bent together, whispering and casting glances at the house. They were vultures circling. You don't have to face them, Lucinda said, handing me a cup of coffee. Stay here. Lie low until things calm down. But I knew that hiding would be seen as an admission of guilt or shame. It would only feed the gossip. No, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I have to go to the market. The children will need fresh milk when they wake up. I took a bath, put on one of my best handmade dresses, a simple, elegant navy blue, and combed my hair with deliberate care. I even applied a touch of lipstick, a small act of defiance. I was not a woman crumbling in despair. I was a woman holding herself together. Walking to the market that morning was one of the hardest things I have ever done. It felt like walking a gauntlet. I could feel the stares, hear the whispers that died down as I approached. At the butcher shop, the lively chatter ceased the moment I walked in. Women I had known for years, with whom I had traded recipes and gossip, suddenly found the floor intensely interesting. It was Mrs. Zulmera, the owner of the inn, who broke the suffocating silence. Mrs. Miller, she said, her voice clear and kind. It's good to see you out. I was just saying to my husband how brave you are being through all of this. Her small act of kindness was like a beacon in the darkness. It gave me the strength to finish my shopping with my head held high. Inside I was a wreck, a trembling leaf in a hurricane. But I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. A few days later, I was summoned to the state capitol to give a formal statement. The thought of being in an official setting, of having to recount the story, was terrifying. The children stayed with Lucinda, and I took the early morning bus. Wearing a somber gray suit, I had tailored myself to look as respectable and serious as possible. At the police headquarters, I was led into a sterile, impersonal room where 3 men waited for me. Inspector Mendez, a stern-looking prosecutor, and a young clerk. Mrs. Miller, Inspector Mendez began, his eyes studying me with an unnerving intensity. We want to be clear. You are not a suspect here. We just need to understand the full picture. For the next 4 hours I answered their questions. I told them everything, starting with the migraine that led me into Anthony's office. I told them about the note, the jewelry receipt, my trip to Richmond, my discovery of Marianne. I recounted finding the tickets and the letters. I detailed the financial documents I had seen. The only thing I omitted was my own role in delivering the evidence to them. A deep-seated instinct told me to keep that part of the story to myself. It was my secret, my power. When I finished, the prosecutor looked at me over the top of his glasses. Mrs. Miller, you've been through a terrible ordeal. Your husband and Mr. Edward will be facing a long list of charges. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. They will likely be in prison for a very long time. He then informed me that our house, which was financed through the bank, would be repossessed as part of the damages. We would have to be out in 30 days. Before I left, Inspector Mendez walked me to the door. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice low, "we received a very detailed anonymous tip 2 weeks ago. Copies of documents, photographs, extraordinarily thorough. It's what allowed us to intercept the transfer and prevent a $500,000 theft." He paused, his gaze meeting mine. "It was you, wasn't it?" I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. I said nothing. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Whoever it was," he continued, "is a very courageous person. They didn't just save the bank's money. They likely saved lives, including perhaps your own." He handed me his card. "If you ever need anything, you call me. You have shown remarkable strength." I returned to my small town that night with the cold, hard certainty that my old life was well and truly over. On the bus ride home, watching the familiar landscape rush by in the darkness, I made a vow. My children would not be defined by their father's crimes. I would build a new life for us, a life of honesty and dignity, brick by brick if I had to. The next 30 days were a whirlwind of painful goodbyes. I had to explain to my children that their father had done something very wrong and would be away for a long time. "Doesn't he love us anymore?" Teresa asked, her big brown eyes swimming with tears. "Of course he does," I lied, my heart aching. "But sometimes adults make terrible mistakes, and they have to face the consequences." I sold what few pieces of furniture were truly mine. I packed our lives into a few worn suitcases. Friends and neighbors revealed their true colors. Some avoided me, their fear of scandal stronger than their friendship. But others, the true ones, rallied around me. Mrs. Eulalia pressed a thick envelope of cash into my hand. "A loan, not a gift," she insisted. "To start your business. I know you're good for it." Lucinda promised to bring the children for visits. Mrs. Erasima brought over a casserole every other night. On moving day, I took one last look at the house on the tree-lined street. The house where I had been a bride, a mother, a wife. The house that had held so many lies. I felt no sadness, only a profound sense of release. My friend Louise was waiting for us at the bus station in the capital. Her warm, welcoming smile was the first ray of sunshine in a long, dark winter. She hugged me tightly. "Welcome home, Gertie," she said. "Welcome to your new life." The room behind her studio was tiny. A single bed for the three of us, a small table, a shared bathroom. But it was clean and it was safe. That first night, after the children had fallen into an exhausted sleep, I sat on the small back step, looking up at the unfamiliar city sky. The stars were dimmer here, obscured by the city lights, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could breathe. The Gertrude who had found a note in a Bible was gone. In her place was a woman who had nothing left to lose, and therefore everything to gain. The future was a blank page. And for the first time I was the one holding the pen. The first few months in the capital were a brutal education in humility and hardship. Life was stripped down to its bare essentials: work, sleep, and the constant gnawing worry about money. I worked 12-hour days at Louise's studio, doing alterations and simple sewing jobs. The work was mind-numbing, but it paid the bills. Barely. At night, after Michael and Teresa were asleep, I would work for a few more hours on my own designs, sketching by the light of a single lamp, my dreams of having my own clientele feeling impossibly distant. The children struggled, too. They were enrolled in a large, noisy public school, a stark contrast to the small, intimate school they had known. Michael, always serious, became even more withdrawn. Teresa, my little artist, stopped drawing for a while. They missed their home, their friends, and yes, even their father. We received news of the trial through the newspapers. Anthony was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Edward, deemed the mastermind, received 10. I showed the newspaper clippings to the children, not to foster bitterness, but to teach them a hard lesson about choices and consequences. "Can we visit him?" Michael asked, his voice small. It was the last thing I wanted to do, but I had made a promise. "Yes," I said. "He made mistakes, but he is still your father." Our first visit to the penitentiary was a surreal nightmare. Seeing Anthony in a drab prison uniform, his hair already showing flecks of gray, his confident swagger gone, replaced by a weary resignation, was a shock. Teresa cried the entire time. Michael sat in stoic silence, his eyes wide, trying to reconcile this diminished man with the powerful father he remembered. Are you getting by?" Anthony asked, his eyes avoiding mine. "We're starting over," I replied, my voice cool and even. There was nothing else to say. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to build a new life. Louise was my rock, my mentor. She taught me about the business side of fashion, introduced me to fabric suppliers, and passed along clients who were looking for more than simple alterations. After 6 months of relentless work, I had my first few private clients. Women who admired my meticulous craftsmanship and classic, elegant designs. With the money I saved, every single penny, and the loan from Mrs. Eulalia, we were finally able to move out of Louise's back room. We rented a small 2-bedroom apartment in a modest neighborhood. It was old and a little shabby, but it was ours. We furnished it with second-hand pieces we found at thrift stores. I sewed bright, colorful curtains for the windows. Michael and Teresa painted a mural on their bedroom wall. We were turning a rented space into a home. One rainy afternoon in October of 1971, about 2 years after we had fled our old life, there was a knock on our door. I had just turned 31, and my small home-based atelier, set up in our living room, was finally starting to gain a reputation. Michael, now 10, opened the door. "Mom," he called out, his voice hesitant. "There's a lady here. She has a baby." I wiped my hands, pricked from a dozen pins, and walked to the door. Standing on our doorstep, drenched and shivering, was Marian Oliveira. In her arms, wrapped in a damp blanket, was a baby of about a year old. Time stood still. It was her. The woman from the letters. The woman for whom my life had been dismantled. She was thinner than in the photographs I'd seen in Anthony's secret box, her face etched with exhaustion and despair. All the anger, all the hurt I had so carefully buried, threatened to erupt. How dare she show up here? How dare she bring the living, breathing proof of my husband's betrayal to my home? But then I looked at the baby. He was sleeping, his face peaceful, his chubby cheeks rosy. He had long, dark eyelashes, just like Michael's had been. He was an innocent child, a victim in this mess just as much as my own children were. He was my children's brother. My anger receded, replaced by a strange, weary compassion. "Come in," I said, my voice hoarse. "You're getting soaked." Marian hesitated on the threshold, clutching the baby to her chest as if I might try to take him from her. Her eyes, wide and fearful, darted around our small living room, taking in the organized chaos of my sewing business. The dress form in the corner, the bolts of fabric stacked against the wall, the half-finished garments draped over chairs. I'm sorry to just show up like this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." Teresa, drawn by the new voices, appeared from the bedroom, her curiosity piqued. I put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Children, this is an acquaintance. She needs a little help," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Michael, please get a clean towel from the closet. Teresa, put the kettle on for some tea." My children, bless their hearts, responded without question, their innate kindness overriding any confusion. While they were busy, I gestured for Marianne to sit on our worn sofa. She perched on the very edge, as if she didn't deserve to take up space. "Is it a boy?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Yes," she replied, gently dabbing the baby's damp face with the towel Michael brought her. "His name is Charles. He's 10 months old." I made tea and brought out a plate of cookies. Marianne accepted them with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the cup. The children, sensing the heavy, unspoken tension in the room, quietly retreated to their bedroom. When we were alone, the story came tumbling out of her, a torrent of misery and despair. After the scandal broke, she had been evicted from the house in Richmond. She had returned to her parents' home in Norfolk, but when Charles was born, the shame was too much for her father. He had thrown her out, calling her son a bastard. She had tried to find work as a teacher, but her name was now infamous. Doors were slammed in her face. "Anthony, he wrote to me," she said, her voice cracking. "He promised he would come for us when he got out. He said we would be a family." I believed him. From her worn purse, she pulled out a crumpled, tear-stained letter. It was from Anthony, written in the familiar, neat script that had once signed love notes to me. The letter was short and brutal. He was getting out soon, he wrote, but he needed to start his life over. He wouldn't be able to support her or the boy. It was better for everyone if they went their separate ways. I handed the letter back to her without a word. It was pure Anthony. Use people for his own gratification, then discard them when they became inconvenient. I was not surprised. I have nothing left, she sobbed, the tears finally coming. We've been staying in cheap motels. The money is almost gone. I heard you had started a business, that you were doing well. I didn't come here to ask for charity, Mrs. Miller. I came to ask for a job. I'll do anything. I can clean, I can answer the phone. I just need a chance. For my son. I looked at her, this young woman who was supposed to be my rival, my enemy. I saw not a homewrecker, but another victim of Anthony's lies. She had been deceived just as I had been. She had believed his promises just as I once had. The only difference was that I had discovered the truth in time to fight back. She had been blindsided, left with a baby and a handful of broken dreams. And I looked at the sleeping child in her arms. Charles, my children's half-brother. He was innocent. He deserved a chance. In that moment, I made a decision that would change all of our lives. It wasn't a decision made from logic, but from a place deep within me that I didn't even know existed. It was a choice born of shared pain and a refusal to let Anthony's cruelty define yet another life. Do you know how to sew? I asked. She shook her head. No, but I'm a fast learner. I was a teacher. I'm organized, I'm good with details. I took a deep breath. I have a small storage room in the back, I said, pointing to a tiny room off the kitchen. It's not much, but there's room for a mattress and a crib, and I need someone to manage my appointments, organize my supplies, and handle the books while I sew. The pay won't be much to start, but it will include room and board. Her eyes widened, filled with a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. You would do that? For me? After everything? I'm not doing this for you, Marianne, I said, my voice clear and steady. I'm doing it for your son. He is my children's brother. And maybe I'm doing it a little for myself. I have carried enough anger for a lifetime. It's time to let it go. That night, after Marianne and baby Charles were settled in the small back room, I sat my own children down. I explained as gently as I could that the baby was their brother, their father's son from another woman. I told them that he and his mother needed our help. Michael, my perceptive, old-souled son, frowned. Is she the woman Dad left us for? Yes, I answered honestly. But she was tricked just like we were. And the baby has done nothing wrong. Teresa, with the beautiful simplicity of an 8-year-old, simply asked, when he's bigger, can I play with him? The road ahead was not easy. The first few weeks were a minefield of awkward silences and unspoken resentments. Neighbors whispered. My few friends were baffled. The betrayed wife and the mistress, living under the same roof? Louise had said, shaking her head in disbelief. Gertie, are you a saint or a madwoman? But slowly, a strange and unexpected routine began to form. Marianne, true to her word, was a marvel of organization. She transformed my chaotic appointment book into a streamlined system. She managed my inventory, handled the billing, and dealt with clients with a gentle grace that put them at ease. Freed from the administrative tasks that I loathed, I was able to focus entirely on my creative work. My productivity doubled. The children, as children often do, adapted more quickly than the adults. Teresa doted on her new baby brother. Michael, though more reserved, would often read to Charles or help Marianne by rocking his crib. In the quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Marianne and I would sit in the small kitchen, sharing a cup of tea. We were two women who should have been mortal enemies, bound together by the man who had wronged us both. We talked. We told our stories. I told her about the note in the Bible, about my secret investigation. She told me about how Anthony had charmed her, how he had sold her a dream of a perfect life, a life built on a foundation of lies. One night she looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad understanding. You sent the evidence to the inspector, didn't you? She said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. That's why he was caught. I did what I had to do to protect my children, I said simply. She nodded slowly. If I had known the truth, she said, her voice quiet but firm, I would have done the same thing. In that small kitchen over countless cups of tea, a fragile bridge of understanding was built. We were not friends, not yet. But we were allies. We were survivors. And we were, in the most unconventional way imaginable, becoming a family. The business, now run by the two of us, began to thrive. We were a team. And we were just getting started. The years that followed were a testament to the strange and powerful alchemy of shared purpose. Our little home-based business, now co-managed by the most unlikely of partners, began to flourish. With Marianne handling the logistics and client relations with the meticulous care of a schoolteacher, I was free to design and create. My reputation grew. I was no longer just a seamstress, I was a designer. Women came to me for wedding dresses, for ball gowns, for clothes that made them feel beautiful and powerful. By 1973, our small apartment was bursting at the seams with fabric, patterns, and clients. It was time to expand. An influential client, a woman who owned a chain of upscale fabric stores, made us an offer we couldn't refuse. She would provide the capital and the connections to open a real boutique in the city center if I would provide the talent. I need to discuss it with my partner, I told her. That night, Marianne and I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by financial projections and sketches on napkins. It was a huge risk, but it was also the opportunity of a lifetime. "We can do this, Gertrude," Marianne said, her eyes shining with a determination I had come to admire. Together, we named it Atelier Gertrude. In 3 frantic, exhausting months, we transformed an empty storefront on Madison Avenue into an elegant, welcoming boutique. We hired 2 additional seamstresses. The grand opening was a modest affair, with cheap champagne and homemade appetizers, but it felt like a coronation. Michael, now a serious 12-year-old, acted as the doorman. Teresa, 10, handed out small lavender sachets she had made. And little Charles, almost 3, charmed everyone with his infectious giggle. Looking at my children so happy and healthy, at Marianne so poised and confident, at the beautiful space we had built from nothing, I felt a wave of gratitude so profound it almost brought me to my knees. 4 years ago, my life had been in ruins. I was a penniless, disgraced wife with a death threat hanging over her head. Now I was a business owner, a matriarch of a strange, beautiful, resilient family. Our success was not without its challenges. There were still whispers, still judgmental stares, but we learned to ignore them. We were too busy building our empire. One afternoon, a man walked into our boutique. He was thin and pale, with prematurely gray hair and the haunted look of someone who had seen the inside of a prison cell and never quite left it behind. It took me a moment to recognize him. It was Edward, Anthony's former partner, the man who had written the note. He had been released from prison for good behavior. He had come, he said, to apologize. "I need you to know," he said, his voice raspy. "The note, that was Anthony's idea. He was so afraid you'd find out about Marianne, about the money. He said it was just a precaution, that we'd never actually have to, you know." I went along with it. And I've spent the last 3 years in a cell thinking about what kind of man that makes me. He told me that Anthony felt no remorse, that he blamed everyone but himself for his downfall. But Edward, it seemed, had been broken and remade by his time in prison. "Your anonymous tip," he said as he was leaving. "It did more than just stop us. You saved people, Mrs. Miller. If we had gotten away with that money, the textile factory wouldn't have expanded. Hundreds of people would have lost their jobs. Families would have been ruined. You did a brave thing. A right thing." His words settled something in me. A final piece of a puzzle I didn't even know was incomplete. The guilt I had carried, the small, nagging fear that I had acted out of pure revenge, finally dissipated. I had acted to save myself and my children, yes, but my actions had had ripples of good that I had never anticipated. Life moved on. The boutique thrived. We moved to a larger, more prestigious location on Park Avenue. We launched a successful ready-to-wear line, inspired by Teresa's increasingly sophisticated fashion sketches. We bought a beautiful house in Georgetown with a garden and a separate studio space for me. The children grew into remarkable young adults. Michael, brilliant and focused, was accepted into MIT to study engineering. Teresa, my artistic soulmate, went to the Rhode Island School of Design, with plans to one day join me as my creative partner. And Charles, raised by 2 fiercely independent and business-savvy women, showed an early aptitude for management and finance. He was a perfect blend of Marianne's organizational genius and, I had to admit, Anthony's ambition, but tempered with a kindness his father never possessed. Our unconventional family was a source of strength and love. Marianne and I were more than partners. We were sisters, bound by a history that no one else could ever understand. We had taken the wreckage of our lives and built something beautiful and strong in its place. Then, in the summer of 1976, 7 years after Anthony had been sent to prison, the past came calling. He was out. Chapter 10: The Ghost at the Door. He appeared at the boutique on a Tuesday afternoon. I was fitting a young bride for her wedding gown when my receptionist informed me that a Mr. Anthony Miller was here to see me. The pin I was holding slipped from my fingers, pricking my skin. A single bright red droplet of blood bloomed on the white satin. My first instinct was to say I was busy, to send him away. But then I looked at the young woman in the mirror, her face full of hope and dreams, and I thought of the woman I had become. I was no longer the frightened wife who trembled at her husband's moods. I was Gertrude Miller, the founder of Atelier Gertrude. I was in control. "Ask him to wait," I said, my voice steady. 15 minutes later, I walked into the reception area. He looked smaller. The years in prison had stripped him of his arrogance, leaving behind a man who seemed worn and tired. His hair was completely white. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit that was at least a decade out of style. "Gertrude," he said, standing up. "Anthony," I replied, my tone cool and professional. "Let's talk in my office." My office was my sanctuary, a space that reflected my success. It was elegant, organized, and filled with light. On the walls were framed sketches by Teresa. On my desk was a photograph of our 3 children, laughing together in the garden of our Georgetown home. "You've done well," he said, his eyes taking in the room. "What do you want, Anthony?" I asked, getting straight to the point. "I want to see my children," he said, his gaze fixed on the photograph. "Michael is 15 now, Teresa 13, and Charles, he's 7. I've missed so much." A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. He hadn't missed anything. He had thrown it all away. "That's not entirely up to me," I said. "Michael and Teresa are old enough to make their own decisions. As for Charles, you'll have to speak to Marianne." His face flushed with shame. "I wrote her a terrible letter," he admitted. "I was a coward. I thought it would be easier to just disappear. But I was wrong. I want to be a father to him. To all of them." That night, I gathered the family in our living room. I told them their father was out of prison and wanted to see them. Michael, my serious, stoic son, crossed his arms. "I have nothing to say to him," he said, his voice hard. Years of quiet resentment had built a wall around his heart. Teresa, always the more emotional one, chewed on her lip, her eyes welling with tears. I think I want to see him," she said. "I have questions." Marianne was silent for a long time. "He gave up his right to be Charles's father when he wrote that letter," she said finally. "But Charles deserves to know who he is. I will meet with him, but it will be on my terms." The weeks that followed were fraught with emotional turmoil. Teresa met with Anthony in a public cafe. She came home looking drained but relieved. "He cried when I showed him my drawings," she told me. "He said he was sorry. I don't think I can forgive him, Mom, but I don't hate him anymore." Michael refused to see him, pouring all his energy and adolescent anger into his studies. Marianne met Anthony in a park, with Charles playing on the swings nearby. She told me later that he had offered her money for Charles's education. She refused. "I told him we didn't need his money," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "I told him that you and I had built a good life for our children, a life based on honesty and hard work. I told him he could see Charles occasionally, but only if Charles wanted to." Anthony became a peripheral figure in our lives, a ghost from a past we had all moved on from. He found a modest job as an accountant and lived in a small rented room. He would sometimes take Teresa and Charles out for ice cream on a Sunday. He never again tried to exert any control or authority. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The man who had once held my life in his hands was now a visitor, a supplicant, allowed into our world on our terms. Years passed. Our business grew into a nationally recognized brand. Michael graduated from MIT and started his own successful engineering firm. Teresa became my partner, her fresh, modern designs breathing new life into the atelier. Charles, after graduating from business school, took over the financial management of our company, proving to have a brilliant mind for numbers, a trait inherited from the father he barely knew. Marianne and I grew old together, our partnership evolving into a deep, abiding friendship. We were two halves of a whole, our lives so intertwined that we were more sisters than friends. Anthony passed away in 1995 from a sudden heart attack. We all attended the funeral, me, Marianne, our 3 children. We weren't there to mourn a husband or a lover, but to acknowledge the man whose terrible choices had, in the most bizarre and unexpected way, brought us all together and set us on a path to a life more full and more authentic than we could have ever imagined. Today at 78, I look back on that terrified 29-year-old woman reading a death threat in her husband's Bible, and I wish I could tell her something. I wish I could whisper in her ear, "Courage, Gertrude. This is not the end. This is the beginning. The storm will be brutal, but the life you build from the wreckage will be more beautiful than you can possibly dream." That note was meant to be my death sentence. Instead, it was my liberation. It forced me to find a strength I never knew I possessed. It led me to a sisterhood I never expected. It taught me that sometimes the things that are meant to break us are the very things that end up making us whole. And that is a truth more powerful than any lie, hidden in any book. Do not forget to subscribe, share, and comment.